Hello and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast. I'm your host, David Battistella. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, we introduce you to Anastasia Brencick and Jack Blackburn. Both are focusing trainers who are exploring new and interesting ways of including focusing as part of their daily work. Customarily, in focusing, we do not associate physical touch with the practice. It would not normally be considered to be part of a focusing exchange or partnership. Adding physical touch could break an implied touch barrier and could possibly infringe on the safety of the boundaries set out in focusing practice and partnership as most of us understand it. Anastasia and Jack are both body workers. Anastasia holds a master's in applied psychophysiology and an undergrad degree in social work. Jack holds a master's degree in counseling. Jack, among other things, is a teacher of body workers and other caregivers, and Anastasia, among other things, teaches body workers and has a background as a social worker in domestic violence. Both are licensed massage practitioners and have taught professional classes combining touch and focusing. What happens when we add focusing to the bodywork practice and appropriate touch to a focusing practice? Jack and Anastasia have come together to create focusing courses for body workers and using focusing to create a bridge between body workers and verbal therapists. Their goals are first to enable more client empowerment and body-centered awareness. Second, to use the principles of focusing to support mutual understanding between the different caregiving professions. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy this discussion on incorporating focusing into bodywork, and listen as Jack and Anastasia share the small miracles they've felt through their hands and in their whole being by bringing a focusing way into their body healing practices. And joining me now are Anastasia Brencick and Jack Blackburn. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to begin. Could you each briefly introduce yourselves and just speak a little bit about your individual practices?
So I've been a massage therapist for over 20 years. And before that, I was a social worker. And when I started massage, I noticed that people were emoting on the table, and I really wanted to find a way to support them in whatever was happening without it being guided or like psychotherapy, but something that just helped the natural resolution that was happening or the connection that was happening in that client's internal world. So I went to graduate school and learned in the 11th hour about focusing and decided that was exactly how I wanted to be with clients, using this person-centered, non-judgmental, non-guiding or coaching way to support clients where they are and where they might want to go should they choose to do that.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Jack?
Yeah, somewhat similar. I became a body worker over 30 years ago, and I had done 3 years of Vipassana meditation before that, and I experimented with my clients of bringing them into body awareness at the beginning of sessions. And fortunately, I and my clients experienced many amazing results from that process. And so I decided that I wanted to develop the process even further. And I also wanted to become a licensed counselor so that I could legitimately not do psychotherapy, but do spiritual counseling with my clients. So I, too, went to graduate school and got a master's degree in theology and ministry. And I was able to use my practice as my internship over the 3 years of graduate school and write papers about my experience using words with people who were experiencing their body at the same time. And so that's basically, and then I developed a practice called table talking while I was in graduate school. I, too, was introduced to focusing towards the end of graduate school and returned to it. It was about maybe about 6 years later. And went to a focusing convention, got my first experience of focusing and used in a lot of different approaches to people. And and then I decided, okay, this is where I want to develop more and more that ability to work with clients directly. So somewhat similar to Anastasia.
Yeah, so because I wanted to just talk a minute about, because you both have such experience with dealing with clients in this way, I just wanted to talk a minute about some of the things that you've noticed in your experience through your work that a body does outside of our own consciousness. And I think I'm sort of getting to that idea where we sort of walk around and a lot is happening in our body that's totally outside our consciousness. And I just wanted to get a sense from each one of you what that feels like, what that means for you. Maybe we could start with Jack.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, one of the things I am aware of and say in my classes is that 99% of what takes place in the body, we have almost nothing to do with. We make choices of when to eat, when to sleep, and so on, where to go, and what to do. But what keeps us alive in the body? It happens with an autonomic nervous system. It happens with all different processes that go on in the body, independent. When someone's sitting in a classroom, it's really obvious that they're going to change their posture probably in about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, because the body is giving them a signal that if they sit longer in that position, they're going to go numb. So they change their position. This is going on all the time. The body is blinking us, it's swallowing, it's breathing, the heart is circulating the blood in the system. All these things are going on. We're fighting illness. We're digesting. We're using the substances that we want from the food we eat, and the body makes those choices. So it's a very interesting process that goes on. The other thing the body does, which is absolutely miraculous, and nobody has really explained this, and that is that the body gives us the feeling awareness of everything that's happening in us and around us. All we have to do is pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will add that Jean Genlin used to say, the body does all the living we know that we're doing and all the living we don't know that we're doing. And I found that to be so helpful in describing what it means to live in this world and have these felt senses, this, why is this person in the room? Why do I feel this particular way in my body when this person is approaching me? Whereas this other person, my body's reacting completely differently. And we know pheromones, one of the hormones that's released from the body, we're picking it up through our olfactory system and, basically smelling the hormones coming off of someone. So we're getting information that we don't consciously know we're we're getting, as one example.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as Jack was saying, tapping into this this wonderful place of possibility of knowing through just paying attention, through pausing, revolutionary pauses, as I love to talk about, and notice what is here more than what we consciously know.
Yeah, as you were saying that, it brought to mind my experience here in Italy. And there's a saying in Italian where someone says "a pelle," which means I got a skin sensation when I met that person. And they could say it can be used either way. It could say, my skin kind of told me I really like this person, or it could also be used as my skin sort of, this person sort of repelled me, and my skin was telling me that this wasn't a good person. Like I got a bad vibe, we'd say maybe, but the Italians actually describe it as at a skin level, like that, that sort of whole idea that at the level of your skin, you're receiving that kind of information. So, yeah. So because we're talking about focusing in touch, I just wanted to give you each the opportunity to tell me a bit about how you met and the work you're doing together.
Well, Jack and I met through a peer group. Isn't that right? Actually,
Yes.
no. Well, we knew each other in that way, but I actually took one of your classes years ago at a AMTA convention. I think it was the Table Talk class. So that was kind of neat. And so we were in this peer group with 4 other people in our profession. And I think you were the one that told me about focusing in the peer group as I was in graduate school, and invited me to the focusing and body work retreat or conference that was in Italy. It was in Ischia, and it was a beautiful setting, and it was where people were wanting to explore how to integrate touch and focusing, but was also people who were doing yoga and other body-based practices that may not use touch, but they wanted to find out how to integrate focusing more in that. And it was a wonderful time. We learned quite a bit. And from that point, both Jack and I would talk about what we were noticing in our practices. And both of us on our own kind of realized we're noticing that when we integrate focusing with using our bodywork practices, that when someone is having a felt sense and a felt shift happening, we're feeling it happening in the body. In other words, my hands are on the person's body, and they are coming into contact with something in their inner awareness, sitting with it, finding that felt shift happening, and then all of a sudden the tissue softens, it warms, it opens, becomes more, I'm able to feel more fascial sheets, the viscosity between them, and more movement in different directions than just the maybe 1 or 2 that I was noticing before. There's more mobility that happens. So this was incredible to have this actual physiological shift and change that we're noticing in our hands. Was like, oh my heck, this is amazing. And how great is it to have a person be able to accompany you if you are having a felt shift and noticing it too. So in this physical way. So that was very exciting, and we decided to teach. Jack invited me to do some teaching with him, and it's just been great. I've been really blessed to know him, and we've become very good friends.
Yeah. So thank you for that, Anastasia. It's very true. All of that happened. I'm going to add some little pieces. In 2004 at the Focusing Convention in Costa Rica, a bunch of us got together in a group who were using touch and movement and body awareness in our practice with clients. And for all the days of that convention, we met separately as much as we can. We developed our own theories about combining touch with focusing and movement and more body awareness. And by the end of the convention, we decided we were going to hold our own conventions called Touching at the Edge. And that happened, as Anastasia said, on the island of Ischia. We were able to gather mostly Europeans because it was in Italy. And there were MDs and psychotherapists and just many, many different professionals there who had focusing as the background, but really wanted to go deeper and in terms of the body experience. So that was our beginnings. And then each focusing convention, we would present different people from the group that initiated that Ischia conference. We would present our own version to people who had not really experienced touch and focusing or movement and focusing. We all presented separately at those gatherings. And then I was inspired by that and started organizing classes for focusers in Japan, where we combined touch with focusing. I taught them how to touch appropriately so that they could feel with their hands as opposed to, trying to change something with their hands. That was a really remarkable experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, so these are kind of background things too. Then Anastasia and I presented together at the focusing conference in Seattle, and this was one of our opportunities to really explore with both counselors and psychotherapists and body workers how they could come together and discover with one another, discover these amazing confluences of both touch and focusing in the body. Yeah.
Wow, you met in such a focusing way. I'm really appreciating that sort of union which sort of always seems to happen so beautifully and organically. And you were just talking, Jack, about a beautiful thing that leads right to my next question, which is that generally in focusing partnership or in a focusing practice, touch is not something we would normally associate in focusing partnership. But I want to ask you both about speak a little bit about how do you introduce touch and maintain safety in a focusing partnership?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the most asked questions in our classes. How do we do that? How do you, for body workers, there's this this conversation about licensing. Well, if you're a body worker, you shouldn't really be talking. And if you're a therapist, psychotherapist, you shouldn't really be touching. So we already have this worry, this thing that's happening between professions, and it's unfortunate because what happens is when we're following the healing process, we are stymieing or holding back how it unfolds because of our licenses, and that I totally get why. Because there have been people in psychotherapy that have been hurtful to others using touch, and there are body workers that are using words that are not helpful in the bodywork session. So I totally get it. At the same time, we need to come together and find a way to do healing, healthy, safe, trusting work with people and following where that healing process goes as much as we can in our ability, because, of course, healing happens with one's own self, and we're there just supporting what wants to come. Having said that, there are boundaries there. There are times where using touch is not appropriate. For instance, if someone is having a hard time with staying present, the practice would be staying in presence and maybe not using touch so much. And people who are coming to get body work, who expect to be touched, there are times where touch isn't appropriate because their bodies are showing signs that that's not where they are, that they're not able to integrate that quite yet. And it's really important for me as a practitioner to do my own focusing practice, to know what is, to be sensitive enough to notice that, and to be sensitive enough to notice that it's not about my agenda and getting to the touch part. It's about meeting where the client is and supporting them where they are so they can do their own unfolding in their own time.
Mm-hmm. So that the healing you're facilitating, but ultimately the responsibility for it is happening within the client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and isn't that wonderful? Because that means that all the things that is not in that person's conscious awareness can, on its own time, become known. So if I'm a client and I'm depressed and I'm having such a hard time being in the world, I'm not being guided to not be depressed anymore. I'm being guided to just be with what's here and maybe becoming more present to all the other things that are possible in this moment that I might not have been aware of previously, because I'm with someone holding space.
Yeah, and what that makes me think of is that they are ultimately taking ownership of their own healing, which is so much more powerful than putting that or asking someone to facilitate that is one thing, but asking someone to heal you is a completely different thing. So there's something really necessary about that healing, that it be owned by the person themselves. Like, that's what I've always loved about a regular focusing practice, that everything that is happening within you, and there's a kind of a there's an empowering moment when you're owning that healing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that you've trained with Ann Weiser Cornell. One of the things she says that I love is you can only go as fast as your slowest parts. And this is so true, especially if you're working with people who are coming from trauma, which we all are. Oftentimes people aren't going to say it up front, and sometimes people don't even know that they've come from trauma. But if we go faster than the body systems can handle, we risk the overload and the numbing and the dissociation and those kind of things. And we don't want to do that. We want to help people stay present and stay practiced in that, so that whatever wants to come, they can be in that and integrate it on their own terms, in their own time.
Jack, do you have any thoughts on this?
Many. Anastasia and I work a bit differently because our emphasis in graduate school was different. As I said, I'm really focusing on the client's conscious self. What I'm looking at is how much self-awareness that person has, and where are the areas where that self-awareness can grow for the person. One thing I didn't say about the body earlier on is that everything that happens in the body happens now. So, and as I said before, the body accompanies whatever is going on with us. So if we're having a flashback, or we're having a traumatic memory, the key for presence is that the body is accompanying it. If the client feels what is happening as the body is accompanying it, the client comes into presence even though they are recalling something that is from the past. And so what I do very often with clients is the same thing with Anastasia. If touch is inappropriate for the person, I will actually sit across from them and help them notice how their body is supporting and responding to what's going on in the body. There was a time when I worked with many people that have been abused, and so that was one of the things that I would do. The other thing I would do was have them use their own hands on their body, so that because many people who have been abused have not even experienced their own touch, because they dissociate from the touch. So when they actually feel the contact of their hands, and then they feel the effect of that contact inside their body, once again, they're shifting into the present moment. And it's not that they can't process the past, it's that they're processing the past in the present moment. I've had 2014, I've had about a 13-year focusing partnership with someone who's a psychotherapist. We meet practically every week. He is fascinated by touch, and I can often, as we're meeting together, help him go into a part of his body and become more aware, using basically different words than focusing, because I'm also naming the body part that he's experiencing, and where that body part connects with other parts of the body, and how it forms a kind of a bigger picture in terms of what he's experiencing inside. So anyway, we've been experimenting back and forth with one another for all these years. So, and I guess one thing, and Anastasia and I've had many talks about this, I also trained with Anne, but I'm also aware that the body itself and the conscious being is not divided into parts. And so when we look with parts, we often are going into stored memories that are they're very important to that person's understanding and awareness, but it's very different than addressing the whole being as it shows up right now in this moment. So I have a somewhat different approach, because not only am I addressing the whole being in the session, but I'm addressing the presence that exists between the practitioner and the client.
Right.
And I just would say one thing about healing. I differentiate, and Anastasia and I do this together. I differentiate healing from fixing. That often we are people who come to see us, like I had a guy yesterday who wanted me to fix his shoulder. Well, I told him I don't work the way you've received in the past, and that what I really need to do is bring you into your shoulder. And we're going to kind of do that together. As Anastasia was saying, my hands can feel his, when he does come into his shoulder, I can feel him coming in. And I can reflect that back to him when his shoulder changed, which was all basically done by him, just coming into the right places. Then I could feel that change. I mean, all of a sudden he had total movement. This is a guy with a frozen shoulder. He had total movement of his shoulder and arms and so on.
But it's like it sounds like you're describing sort of assistance in noticing.
Exactly. The second class that Anastasia and I taught is called self-authoring. And that really means that using the experience of body awareness and whatever is occurring in the person's process, that the person is not just taking responsibility, they're actually coming into a place where they recognize that their life is growing out of their own choices, their own experience. One more thing about healing is that in my classes, I teach that healing is a two-way experience always. So that means if we're doing focusing, companioning, and with focuser, or we're doing body work practitioner and client, that both persons are changed by that experience. It's not a one-way experience. And so there's yeah, go ahead.
No, I just want to repeat that healing is a two-way experience always.
Yes. Yeah. Because healing is like what we sometimes use the language of reframing. Healing means something very profound has shifted. And when we have the good fortune to be with somebody when that's taking place, it's shifting for us too. Yeah.
That's where it gets very spiritual, I find.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put this, like, how does this kind of focusing produce felt shifts? I mean, you started to sort of describe it there with this client, Jack, who had the sort of frozen shoulder, and your approach was much different. Like, I mean, I think a lot of people would perhaps show up for body work and expect to lie on a table, and you might say, no, let's just sit here for a moment. And, you know, I have a sense that, or maybe describe for me what that is in your shoulder and maybe take them in that way. Is that the sort of approach? Am I understanding it correctly?
Yeah, I was kind of self-listening, so forgive me if I shift away a little bit.
That's
from
okay.
what you were saying. I would say that the felt shift is implicit, that it's available, and especially in terms of the body. One of the ways of thinking about the body, and as we were talking about earlier, all these things that go on in the body that we have very little to do with, is that the body fundamentally heals itself. Any kind of injury, any kind of sickness or illness, or even any kind of trauma, the body is taking care of it right away. But that's very different than the mind.
Yeah.
The mind, I was going to say, if someone serves me a bad dinner, something that I really don't like very much, I'll eat it because I'm courteous. But part of me is rejecting that dinner, and my mind is saying, I don't think I'm going to have that person cook me a dinner again.
Right.
But my body is taking care of that dinner. It's deciding, okay, this part I can use, this part I can't use. And so the body digests the dinner, and I don't notice any bad effects from this dinner that I didn't really care for. That's true of all the experiences that we have, especially if it involves the body, that the body takes care of it basically right away. The whole systems, all the systems in the body have a way of keeping us going. Homeostasis, homeogenesis, whatever you want to call it. It keeps us going, keeps us thriving. or not, and it's accompanying the depression. It's accompanying anything that we're going through.
Can I add something to that, Jack?
Yeah, please.
Just that that there's an assumption with clients that I see that means we go back to where we were before the injury, before the trauma, before we ingested the bad dinner. But what's helpful to remember is that we're practicing just how to come into knowing about what is happening. In other words, we're not going back to a place that you were before. We're accepting where we're coming into knowing in this new place. And it can feel, there can be resolution quality in that, for instance, the guy with the frozen shoulder coming into the space, there's a felt shift, and maybe there's pain that dissipates, but maybe not. Mm-hmm. And noticing what comes forth from this knowing of coming into this area. Now, it's lovely that there is pain that shifts many times, but not all the time. And mm-hmm. and like with a lot of other folks that do this kind of work, being with people in injury places, for lack of a better term, that we're not, as Jack was describing, we're not fixing, we're not coming back to a place where there wasn't an issue before. We are going to a new place, uncharted territory, which may or may include pain-free, a pain-free shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a constant newness that sort of is happening. I guess Anne would maybe call it carrying forward energy, but that's not just happening, at the beginning of the hour and then where are we at the end of the hour. It's happening second by second in that time. And it sounds, I read a little bit about NBP, or now body presence. Is that sort of what we're talking about? Like always coming or acknowledging the now body presence?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and part of that understanding, and this is a radical statement, but pain only happens now. And so if we look at pain as this is a signal that comes from the body, it's a signal that's coming because the body is telling us that for some reason we're limited in that part of the body. It's mm-hmm. not telling us we're being tortured. It's not telling us that we did something wrong. It's not telling us all these things that our mind does with the pain. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one of the things and it's a kind of key to my understanding, because everyone has pain. Pain is a very useful signal, but the mind tends to distort the pain and make it into something else. I had a man who is in extreme pain, and he lives with pain. He has some very, very serious problems in his body. He lives with pain, but what he was doing was not only was he catastrophizing, but he was looking for the guilt that had caused the pain. He said, I told her when she was pregnant she had to get an abortion, period. And he felt that his pain was coming from that past experience. And so as I worked with him, I basically taught him how to go into his pain as a signal that's occurring right now. And it was just amazing what took place with him. And he's still doing it. He's still going into the pain and recognizing that signal is something that brings him into a different state of being. So pain is not always a hazard. It's not always, something happening that's wrong. I interviewed a man years ago. He was a doctor who worked with lepers and studied leprosy. and he wrote a book called Pain, the Gift That Nobody Wants, because he recognized that the problem with leprosy is that they don't feel pain. So all the changes that were happening in their bodies that were, where things were atrophying and so on, was because they would do the same thing over and over again without shifting because they couldn't feel the pain. And in his book, he's basically told stories of various people that had gone into their pain and how their life had changed as a result of that. And I mirrored that back to him. And he said, if I had had it in me to write another book, that's exactly what I would write. That when you help a person experience what's going on, especially coming into the pain directly, they change. They change their life. So there's something very profound about body signals that we pay attention to, including pain. And just one other thing. I was teaching in Montreal, and I did at the Focusing Convention, and I did a class about pain. And we use various things to erase the pain. And I showed pictures of remedies that were used in the 19th century, which were always based on opium and so on, and how people would erase their pain by changing their state of awareness, and I made the kind of proposition that pain itself is not so bad. What makes it bad is when we combine fear with pain. That's when we suffer. And I see that over and over with clients, that, when they experience pain and they're worried, maybe it's cancer, maybe it's, maybe now I have osteoporosis or whatever's going on in their minds, or like the guy who blamed himself for the abortion, then they're suffering. That's really the suffering part. And to be able to come in, this is where focusing can be very, very helpful, to be able to come in and experience body now presencing is one of the things that Anastasia and I use in our manuals. Experiencing that, there's a shift away from the fear.
So coming into relationship with, I mean, I've experienced this in the past with injury or sports injury, where I will solo focus into that pain. And it seemed very natural for me that if we were, as focusers, tapping into the wisdom of the body, that I wouldn't just sort of limit that to the throat, chest, and stomach. That's where felt senses may very often occur, and it's a very excellent entry point. But that if I injured a calf muscle or strained something, that I could actually come into relationship with that feeling, be with that feeling, and listen to how it's what's wanting to be expressed from there. And in my case, it allowed me to, in some cases, recall past events, or in other cases, just understand that it was something that was actually quite close, some life situation that was not sort of taken care of by me on a conscious level, that wanted some attention. But I just want to get to this question I just want each of your thoughts about how emotions are held in the body.
We've written about that. Go ahead, Anastasia.
Well, yeah. So there's this belief that there's emotion held in the body, but we're finding that's not really the case. The body is expressing what is happening in our lives moment to moment. So the body's manifesting all of our life experiences up to this moment, and then this moment, and then this moment. So oftentimes when there's an emotion that comes, at least for the clients that I have on the table, it's often a surprise to them that this is happening. Oh, I'm noticing that I've got this tears coming, and I've got tears of gratitude. How interesting that is. And they have more of a oh, this is happening. But somehow there's been this belief in, at least in my profession, that the body is holding an emotion, and we are trying to get it out. And when we have it come out, then resolution happens, and we have peace and harmony, and it's all done. And, if through practicing we realize, nope, that's not really what happens. That can just keep coming up and keep coming up. So we have to go back and notice, okay, so what are we missing about that? Well, so here's someone on the table, and they are having this emotion come. And as a practitioner, I am not wanting that to come out. I'm not trying to do a catharsis. And this is, I might be doing a bit of a tangent here a bit, but as a practitioner, if I am trying to make an emotion come because I feel that emotion means resolution, then I feel like I'm doing a disservice, because that doesn't resolve the situation. That's not where the healing is coming from. That's a sign that there's movement and change, but that doesn't mean that it's here. Mm-hmm. Maybe sometimes it does, but not usually when I am the one that's trying to make that happen. And a lot of practitioners use cathartic modalities to help that go along, and both Jack and I are pretty adamantly not in agreement with that as a way of healing.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our podcast on focusing and touch with body workers Jack Blackburn and Anastasia Brencick. You've been listening to The Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm your host, David Battistella. Please visit our website at thefocusingway.com.